The Earth is surrounded by artificial satellites which are used for communications and observation, but the ones of interest lie in a fixed circle some 24,000 miles away in geostationary orbit. The ones of most interest to English speakers are the astrosatellites, which are fixed in position over the equator above Africa. These satellites are kept in a tight cluster which looks like a single large satellite to any receiving dish antenna on Earth. Each of the satellites contains a number of transponders which collect the signals transmitted from the large uplink dishes on Earth and retransmit the signals back to Earth with the power of only a 60-watt light bulb. To receive the satellite signal, we use a dish-shaped antenna which collects the very weak signal and focuses it onto the low noise block-down converter, or LNB. The LNB converts signals to a lower frequency that can be carried by a cable to your receiver. Many LNBs have a horn-shaped collector called the feed horn, which allows the LNB to focus only on the dish area. This particular LNB has a dielectric collector instead, but it does exactly the same job. Underneath the LNB there is usually a locking screw which sets the rotational position of the LNB. The rotational adjustment is also called skew, and we'll discuss this later. The LNB has a spigot or finger which holds it to the dish arm. In this case the spigot is too small, so the manufacturers have supplied an adapter which must be folded over and fitted into the dish arm to make the hole smaller. A plastic pin is supplied. This is to secure the LNB to the arm to prevent it from falling out. Here is the arm itself. It has an oblong cross-section. Now notice how I am trying to fit the adapter into the wrong end of the arm. This is an easy mistake to make unless you observe the position of the holes and realise that they are not going to align this way round. Some dishes have a spirit level fitted. This makes it much easier to get the dish positioned correctly on the wall. The yellow blobs indicate the satellites sitting 23,000 miles above the equator. The angle indicated is the angle between a line passing from the centre of the Earth to the satellite and a similar line passing from the centre of the Earth to an imaginary position above the 0-degree meridian line. This is not the compass angle, although as the prime meridian line of 0 degrees passes through Greenwich in the UK, the compass angle is often a reasonable approximation if you are in the UK. Elsewhere it's not true, as you can see from the map. If you are in Rome, in Italy, Hotbird at 13 degrees is actually directly south of Rome, so pointing your dish 13 degrees east of south on your compass will miss the satellite by thousands of miles. As it's impossible to guess the compass angle, you should use one of the calculation programs from the internet in order to determine the compass bearing at your location. As a guide, at my location near Manchester, England, the compass bearing for Astra 2 is 33 degrees east of south on the compass. Another way to determine the approximate compass bearing is to stand below a neighbour's sky dish and place a long stick on the ground beneath the dish so that it lines up with the dish arm. Take a compass bearing from the stick. Then place the stick below the position of your own dish using the same compass bearing. The elevation angle of a satellite is the angle measured between the horizon as you see it and a line drawn between you and the satellite. Because the Earth is round, the angles in the UK are typically 20 to 26 degrees. In Europe, 26 to 36 degrees, and of course, if you are standing on the equator in Africa, the satellites are almost directly above you at 90 degrees. There are elevation calculators on the internet. Once you know the approximate elevation angle of the satellite from your location, use a school protractor and a weight on a piece of cotton to check that the satellite is not obscured by a building or tree from the location where you intend to mount your dish. The bolt holes must be in brick and not in the mortar between the bricks. The dish must be located not only where it has an unobstructed view of the satellite, but also where it will not prevent a window from opening or look unsightly. Also, it's a bad idea to mount it above a doorway because it will act as a water trap when it's raining, and you'll get a stream of rainwater pouring from it onto any visitor's head. Ensure that the bracket is perfectly horizontal by using a spirit level to mark a line through the position of the second hole. Then you can mark the positions of the remaining holes through the bracket. Alternatively, if the dish is going to be mounted at a height, it is easier and safer to make a paper or card template. Stick the template to the bricks using blue tack and mark the hole positions through it. Mark each hole with a centre punch so the drill doesn't bounce around, and begin drilling with the hammer action off. When you drill the wall, don't do it like this idiot. Always wear safety glasses to protect your eyes. Plug the drill into a residual current breaker or RCB, which are very cheap to buy and will protect you from electric shock. Check the depth of each hole to make sure that it is longer than the bolt. Also make sure that the bolt holes align with the holes in the bracket. If they don't, the bolt could snap when you tighten it. Fit the plastic plugs into the holes. Blow out any brick dust because this can cause the bolts to bind and snap when you tighten them. Give each bolt a generous coating of grease. Silicone grease is recommended because it is waterproof and will help to prevent the bolt from rusting. It will also reduce the risk of snapping the bolt while tightening it. And, of course, it will make removing the bolts much easier should you need to take your dish down. A 13mm hexagon socket and ratchet wrench is recommended for tightening the bolts, although an ordinary spanner will do. Remember that if the bracket holes don't align with the bolt holes in the wall, the bolt could bend and snap. If the holes don't align, do file them out with a rat tail file. The final tightening should be done gently, so the bracket is just held against the wall. Over-tightening can damage the plastic plugs, leaving the bolts loose. Choice of screwdriver is most important. The screwdriver tip must be a tight fit in the screw slot. If it isn't a tight fit, you are using the wrong screwdriver and it will damage the screw slot when you try to tighten it. Time spent getting the correct screwdriver will save time doing it wrong. Here is a typical dish assembly. A rear bracket must be attached behind the dish face by means of 4 screws. The holes in the dish face never seem to line up with the holes in the bracket, so you should fit the screws loosely, leaving a gap between the dish face and the bracket. This will make it easier to insert the 4th screw. The screws are a thread cutting type, so a great deal of force is required to turn them. This is why it's so important to use the correct screwdriver. Notice that the dish edge is sharp and jagged, so you should wear a leather glove to hold it. Don't copy this idiot, who obviously has plenty of blood to spare. Be careful not to distort the dish, or it won't focus the signal onto the LNB. There are several types of Sky Minidish, and this particular one may not look like yours, but there's always a rear bracket which fits to an arm or a tube, which then fixes to a wall bracket. I'll show you how this one fits together, and you'll probably find that yours is very similar. On this dish, the elevation clamp bolt is fitted first. This can be a fiddly operation if you have fingers like bananas, but you can always borrow a small child to handle the bolts for you. Children love to be involved, so get them to help. The horizontal pivot screw is next. Notice that some bolts are of the coach bolt variety and have square necks. Make sure that you fit these into square holes. Some of the bolts need gentle persuasion to make them fit. Always use the proper tools. A wrench is for wrenching, not for hammering. The nuts and bolts used on a dish usually have 10mm hexagon heads, so you will need a 10mm spanner or wrench to tighten them. It's worth mentioning at this point that you'll need an 11mm open-ended spanner for tightening the cable connection on the LNB. While we have the dish in front of us, I want you to take a close look at the elevation markings on the bracket. Not all dishes have these, but this dish has marks going from 0 to 80 degrees. Remember that elevation is the angle between the horizon and the satellite at your location. I'm going to give you a rest from my voice now because the next part needs no explanation. Watch the movie and listen to the dubs. Just a reminder, here is the elevation adjustment. Use a fairly blunt knife blade to score around the plastic cable sheath about an inch, that's 25mm, from the end. Be careful not to cut the copper strands which form the shield. It helps if you bend the cable over your finger and open up the split with a gentle sewing motion of the knife. Tease the copper strands back over the sheath and peel off the exposed copper foil. Now cut through the white plastic insulator about 1/8 of an inch, that's 3mm, from the black sheath. This plastic insulator is called the dielectric. Pull it off and discard it. Screw the F connector onto the cable. This is made easier if you apply some silicone grease to the cable first. Now take a pair of side cutters and cut the centre copper wire at a shallow angle to leave a sharp point about 3 to 4mm long. The copper wire now forms the centre pin of the plug. Having a sharp point makes it easier to push this wire into the LNB connector without bending the wire. You can save a lot of time by using a Satfinder meter to align the dish. The meter needs at least 12 volts DC power. You can use the LNB supply of your digibox, or a DC power supply, or a battery. The connector marked to receiver should be connected to the power source. The centre copper wire is positive. When the meter gain control is turned up, the meter will whistle even when the LNB is not connected. It will also whistle when the LNB is connected and the dish is pointing at the ground or at any source of interference. If you've got the compass direction or azimuth right, raising the dish will immediately locate the desired satellite. You can then continue to make minor adjustments by turning the meter gain down and moving the dish to get maximum signal. You'll need to do this several times in order to find the optimum position. It requires a little patience and a steady hand, so take your time making this critical adjustment. At this point, it's impossible to be certain that you are aligning the dish on the correct satellite. I'll show you how to do that later. Once you have found the optimum dish position, you must check that the spirit level still indicates that the dish is horizontal, then tighten all the bolts. It's useful to keep the meter connected while you tighten the bolts, and you may need somebody to help you at this stage. Now we can connect the cable to the LNB. Screw the F connector to the LNB carefully. You can use a little silicone grease to make this easier. Tighten it gently with an 11mm open-ended spanner. The cable connection must be waterproofed. There are 3 methods to do this. Firstly, as a temporary measure, you can simply squeeze a strip of blue tack around the F connector. Secondly, as a permanent measure, you can use self-amalgamating tape. Take a 100mm length and peel off the plastic backing strip. Stretch the tape to twice its normal length. Hold one end below the F connector and wind the tape around the cable and up and over the F connector, keeping the tape stretched all the time. Wind the tape as high as you can go above the F connector onto the threads, then continue to wind it around until you are back where you started. Trim off any excess. The tape uses no glue, but the stretching action activates it and makes it bond to itself. In 2 minutes it will form a rubber tube that can only be removed with a sharp knife. The third method is the easiest. Squeeze a generous amount of silicone grease inside a rubber boot and slide it onto the cable. Squeeze more grease over the F connector, then slide the rubber boot up the cable and over the F connector to form a tight seal. To prevent the cable from flapping in the wind, secure it to the LNB support arm with cable ties. Some people prefer to use PVC tape, but this doesn't last long when exposed to rain, wind and sunshine. Secure the cable with a clip every 3rd brick. If the bricks are too hard to take nails, then you'll have to put them in the mortar instead, but this tends to be less secure, so do put them in the brick if possible. I used black clips for demonstration because they are easier to see in this movie, but obviously you would use white clips like these, with white cable, on a white wall. For the cable entry, drill outwards from the room and turn the hammer action off for the last inch to minimise brick damage. Arrange a drip loop. Connect the LNB cable to your Sky Digibox and plug the Digibox into the wall power socket. Switch it on and wait for it to boot up. Press Services on your remote control handset, then press 4 for System Setup, and then press 6 for Signal Test. The important point to note is the network ID. This is 0002, which indicates that you've aligned your dish on Astra 2, which is the correct satellite cluster for Sky Digital. If you don't see this network ID, or you see a different network ID, you have aligned your dish on the wrong satellite. A network ID of 013E would indicate Hotbird at 13 degrees east of south, so you'd need to move your dish to look further east to get Astra 2 at 28 degrees east of south. If the correct network ID is displayed, look at the signal strength and signal quality indication. You should slacken the clamp screw on the LNB and twist the LNB to give the longest grey bar for signal quality. In our example, you can see that the signal strength is about 70% and signal quality is about 80%. This is an excellent reading, so don't worry if yours is lower than this. It's only an indication, so simply get it as high as you can. So, the installation is finished. Or is it? You spend lots of time and money to make your house look nice, and then you screw an ugly black lump of metal to it and pretend that nobody can see it. Or maybe you are proud because it tells everyone that you have a satellite system. Or maybe it's out of sight, so it doesn't really matter anyway. But it's not invisible. You can see it. So why not make it blend in with the surroundings? Paint it to match your house. It won't harm your reception, and it will only take a few minutes. Isn't it worth the effort? You can paint everything, including the LNB. Even the cable can be painted. In fact, paint will protect the cable, the LNB, and the dish from the effects of sun and rain. Of course, the dish doesn't have to be on a house wall. It could be mounted on a garage or a shed and painted to match those surroundings. If the dish must be mounted high up, it may be easier to paint everything before you climb the ladder. So here's your shopping list. Apart from the dish, you're going to need a hammer, a centre punch. This is for starting off the holes that you're going to drill in the wall. You'll need a 10mm masonry bit, plugs and bolts to go in the holes in the wall, a long 10mm drill to drill the hole through the wall for the cable. You'll need some cutters to cut the cable, a screwdriver for the dish screws, a rubber boot or self-amalgamating tape to waterproof the dish connection, a Satfinder Meter, and a connecting cable to use with it. One or two cables with clips so that you can connect the meter to a battery or a power supply. Clips to hold the cable to the wall, and the cable itself, of course, white, black or brown. The screw-on F connectors which go on the end of the cable. And a handy little item, when you're using the meter, you can get a screw-on adapter which allows you to push the connector straight onto the meter to save you screwing and unscrewing all the time. If you ever need to lengthen the cable, you can use a threaded barrel adapter which takes an F connector plug on each end. Silicone grease, handy stuff for everything. Cable ties for holding the cable to the dish arm and the bracketry. They can be in black or white. You'll need the electric drill. a spirit level for making sure that the holes on the wall are horizontal, a set of spanners, and in particular you'll need a 13mm spanner or a 13mm ratchet socket wrench. You'll need a 10mm spanner for assembling the bolts on the dish, and you'll need an open-ended 11mm spanner for just tightening the F connectors on the LNB. Okay, let's zoom in for a final close-up of the items we've discussed. While you are looking at these, let me just mention that the dish doesn't need to be high up. You can bury it in a hole in the ground, provided that its view of the satellite cluster is not obstructed. To disguise it, you could even sink it in a hole, then cover it with a plastic sheet painted to match the colour of the ground. Alternatively, you might prefer to fit it to a ground stand for use while you are camping. Or you could use a tripod or mount it on a pole. There are lots of possibilities, too many to describe in this short movie. However, if you need more information, you'll find it in our electronic book called Installing Sky Digital TV, which you can buy and download at our Cool Bookshop website. This electronic book has over 100 pages of photographs, information and tips from professional installers. You'll find it absolutely invaluable if you are installing a satellite system either in the UK or in remote parts of Europe. That's the end of our movie. I hope you found it enjoyable and instructive.